You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
And this is Texas Public Radio 89.1. I'm Steve Short, and I'm joined in the studio this afternoon with a very familiar voice. Robert Siegel was the co-host of All Things Considered for 30 years. He retired earlier this year, but is back today and here at TPR. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's good to be here.
Well, all things.
And let me just begin by saying Mary Louise Kelly and Ari Shapiro are fantastic. And sitting here and listening to them, I'm honored to have been a host of the program.
Yeah, you were a host 30 years. How did All Things Considered get started?
It got started in the early 70s, a few years before I got there, as the effort of public radio stations around the country to pool some of the reporting they were already doing or interviewing they were already doing. I think it began as a 1-hour-long show. By the time I got there, it was 90 minutes long. NPR, in the end of 76, when I arrived, had, I believe, 10 total reporters, 9 of them in Washington, 1 of them in New York. You would have heard a program that was much lower technical quality than you're hearing today. A lot of phone quality sound. You would have heard interviews that would go on much longer, not just because we thought they should go longer, but because we had to fill the time. And you would have heard far fewer reporters from stations or from bureaus around the country. So it was a work in progress.
Now that you're retired, what's your day like? Do you still listen to All Things Considered?
I don't listen as regularly as I used to when I was working on the program because I'm not driving as much. But I do listen, and I feel that I no longer have any position at NPR except I have the very august position in public radio of listener.
Yeah.
I listen. I'm very proud of all those years I was associated with such a great place.
What do you recall are some of the most fascinating stories or interviews you did?
There are so many. I loved my job and did it long enough, but I loved it. So there are more things than I could possibly tell you. I think when I was sent overnight in an airplane to get over to Berlin because the Berlin Wall was coming down, is in many ways for me the most exciting thing that I was ever present at. I've realized in retrospect that several years of my journalistic life was really those years were really about the waning days of the Cold War and the end of the conflict, global conflict between us and the Soviet Union that I was born into, the world that I was born into. And I was there for seeing it come apart in Europe and be resolved. Being resolved may be a too strong a word when we look at Europe today, but seeing the Berlin Wall come down, seeing East Berliners walk as families through the streets of the West, and talking to them was one of the great experiences of my life.
News has changed throughout the years. Do you think that what kind of changes are we seeing now with this so-called fake news era going on?
Well, I mean, the allegation of fake news, I think, is I think that's just an update of the kind of complaints that politicians have made about reporting that's unfavorable to them or doesn't cast them in the best light. I think the real challenge that we face is that with scurrilous stories that are false fabrications circulating, there's a new obligation for us not to say, well, that's dirt. We shouldn't go near that. But I think there's an obligation of us to examine it and to debunk things, which never seemed to me to be necessary in the past. If somebody claimed there's a Democratic sex ring out of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., who wants to talk about such things? Well, if people believing that might come and shoot up the pizza parlor, which is what happened, maybe we have an obligation to debunk some fake news.
All right, Robert. Well, thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon.
It's been great fun, Steve.
Do you want to take us into the break?
Okay. You're listening to All Things Considered from Texas Public Radio.
I'm Deirdre